The heavy wooden gates close behind you with a deep final thud. For a moment the sound lingers in the stone passageway, echoing upward into towers that seem to swallow noise rather than release it. Outside lies open countryside, fresh air, and the possibility of escape. Inside, the castle feels enclosed almost immediately, not oppressive but undeniably contained. A kind of protection comes into an early 12th century castle, whether welcomed or not. A medieval castle was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to survive. At first glance, the courtyard appears busy rather than grand. Chickens wander freely across packed earth, stepping confidently between workers carrying buckets or bundles of firewood, entirely unconcerned with rank or urgency. A dog naps beside a sun-warmed wall, barely reacting as people pass. Somewhere nearby, a horse stamps impatiently while stable hands continue their morning routines at a pace shaped more by habit than haste. The castle is already awake. Smoke drifts upward from several hearth fires, carrying the steady smell of burning wood mixed with damp stone and cooked grain. The scent settles into everything: wool clothing, hanging cloth, timber beams, even the walls themselves. Residents of an early 12th century household would have stopped noticing it long ago, but to a newcomer it quickly becomes unavoidable. Life here happens closely, continuously, with little separation between work, rest, and daily survival. Castles were crowded places. Even smaller fortifications housed far more people than modern visitors might expect. Nobles lived here, certainly, but so did cooks, guards, servants, craftsmen, messengers, clergy, merchants, and travellers granted temporary protection within the lord's walls. Privacy existed mostly in theory. Someone was almost always nearby, working, talking, or moving toward the next task. Your footsteps sound louder than expected against uneven stone as you cross the courtyard. Above you, narrow windows look downward from thick defensive walls. They admit light cautiously. Wide openings weakened fortifications and invited winter cold, so brightness was willingly sacrificed for safety. Even during daylight, shadows gather easily within castle walls. A guard passes carrying a spear nearly as tall as himself. He nods briefly before continuing his patrol, boots worn smooth from repetition. Contrary to popular imagination, castle life rarely involved dramatic battles. Most days passed in routine vigilance, watching gates, checking stores, maintaining order, and preparing quietly for dangers that might never arrive. Security depended less on excitement and more on patience performed reliably. The castle rises in layers around you, each level connected by staircases twisting upward through stone towers. These spiral stairs turn tightly clockwise, designed to favour defenders during attack. For residents, however, they mostly ensured that nearly every daily chore involved carrying something heavy uphill. Someone hauling water squeezes past, carefully balancing a wooden bucket while navigating the narrow curve of the stairwell. Another follows with armfuls of kindling. Quiet complaints pass between them with familiar understanding. Castles demanded constant effort, and gravity showed little respect for social rank. The great hall soon dominates your view. This vast chamber forms the social and administrative centre of castle life in the early 12th century. Long wooden tables stretch beneath beams darkened by years of hearth smoke. Light filters through high openings while torches burn even during daytime, adding warmth but leaving a faint haze suspended overhead. The air feels busy, warm, and thoroughly lived in. Everything here reflects order. At the far end stands a raised platform where the lord and household leaders dine. Elevation alone communicates authority. Seating arrangements matter deeply. determining status as clearly as land or title. Even meals reinforce hierarchy, with better cuts of meat and fresher bread travelling toward those seated closest to power. Yet despite this structure, the hall feels lively rather than severe. Servants move quickly between benches preparing the day's meal. Conversation hums constantly. News travels quickly. Stories from nearby villages, rumours carried by merchants, accounts of distant events growing slightly more impressive with each retelling. Laughter appears now and then, brief but welcome. Entertainment rarely required spectacle. A musician tuning a lute gathers listeners almost effortlessly. A traveller describing unfamiliar customs becomes temporary fascination. Shared stories fill moments between labour and rest, drawing people together in ways both simple and enduring. Near the central hearth, warmth gathers most comfortably. Flames crackle beneath an iron grate while cooks begin early preparations. Smoke rises imperfectly, lingering beneath ceiling beams before slowly escaping through roof vents. Fires prevented freezing through long winters, though comfort remained imperfect. Eyes watered, people adapted, life continued. As morning advances, activity intensifies. Deliveries arrive through the gate, sacks of grain from surrounding fields, salted meat prepared for storage, barrels rolled carefully across worn stone. Each item must be counted, stored, and protected. Castles functioned less as symbols of romance, and more as carefully managed households responsible for land, food, and protection. Nothing inside these walls operates accidentally. Someone sharpens tools, someone repairs clothing worn thin by labour, someone records accounts on parchment, someone feeds animals before sunrise regardless of weather or fatigue. Survival depends not on grandeur, but repetition carried out faithfully day after day. Gradually the castle reveals its true nature. It is not silent strength frozen in stone, but motion, an organised household sustained by human effort from dawn until nightfall. The walls protect, yet also gather sound, warmth, and responsibility into shared existence. Comfort remains secondary. Drafts slip through cracks in masonry. Floors stay cold beneath thin soles. Seating favours durability over softness. Even nobility accepted conditions that feel austere by modern standards. And yet there is reassurance here. Beyond the walls lie uncertain roads, forests and rival ambitions never entirely distant. Inside, bells mark passing hours. Guards stand watch. Meals arrive predictably. Routine replaces uncertainty. You begin to understand that surviving 24 hours inside an early 12th century castle would not require heroism, only patience. Patience with noise echoing through corridors. Patience with shared space and constant activity. Patience with smoke, cold stone, and the steady rhythm of necessity guiding every hour. Behind you the gates remain closed. Work continues. Fires burn steadily. Voices carry through passages worn smooth by generations who lived much the same way within these walls. And your first morning inside the castle has only just begun. If the walls of an early 12th century castle give it shape, the people inside give it life. Long before the lord appears in the great hall, the household is already in motion. The day begins not with ceremony, but with fire. In the kitchen, often a separate stone building or a side chamber, built thick to contain heat, the hearth has never truly gone cold. Ashes stirred, embers coaxed back to flame. Iron cauldrons hang from blackened hooks above the fire pit. Someone kneads coarse rye dough on a wooden board while another skims yesterday's fat from a pot of pottage. thickened with barley and scraps of cabbage. There is no silence here. Wood cracks, iron scrapes. A cook mutters at a boy turning the spit too slowly. The boy adjusts, then resumes the steady rotation of a roasting joint suspended over flame. It is not glamorous work. It is warm, repetitive, and absolutely necessary. If he stops turning, the meat burns on one side. If he turns too fast, it cooks unevenly. His entire morning is governed by a single axis. In a world without clocks in every room, time is measured in tasks completed. Beyond the kitchens, other rhythms unfold. A laundress kneels beside wooden tubs filled with water drawn at dawn. Beating garments against stone to loosen dirt work deep into wool fibres. Her hands are already raw from cold and lye soap. Nearby, a young squire oils a saddle while glancing occasionally toward the training yard, hoping for instruction that will lift him above maintenance duties. Hope and labour often share the same courtyard. Within the early 12th century castle, hierarchy is clear, but effort is universal. Even minor knights polish mail links and inspect straps. Leather cracks if ignored, metal rusts, grain spoils. Castles survive not because they are strong once, but because someone checks everything every day. In the stables, grooms work methodically through stalls thick with straw. Horses are brushed, hooves inspected for stones, feed measured carefully. A destrier trained for battle demands more attention than a cart horse hauling supplies, yet both require care. The animals do not understand rank. They understand hunger and discomfort, and hunger arrives quickly in a castle. Feeding a large household in the early 12th century is a logistical puzzle solved daily. Grain must be milled into flour. Bread baked in batches large enough to last, but not so long that it turns stale. Ale brewed safely enough to drink, since water is not always reliable. Salted meats checked for spoilage. Herbs measured sparingly. Precious flavour carried from gardens within the outer bailey. Meals appear almost inevitable when served in the hall, but behind that appearance stands a chain of labour stretching from field to fire. Even children are rarely idle. Some fetch water from the well, arms trembling as they carry sloshing buckets across uneven ground. Others run messages between chambers, repeating instructions learned only moments before. Responsibility arrives early in castle life. Childhood exists, but it bends around necessity. Not every task is heavy, some are simply constant. A clerk bends over parchment in a small chamber near the Lord's Solar, scratching figures with quill and ink. Accounts must be kept, stores counted, rents recorded, obligations tracked. Wealth in the early 12th century often rests not in coins alone, but in grain, livestock and loyalty. Miscount a shipment and winter grows longer. Up in the towers, watchmen rotate positions along the wall walk. The landscape beyond the curtain wall appears calm, fields divided by hedgerows, perhaps a distant village chapel rising modestly against the sky. Yet watch is maintained regardless. Vigilance, like fire, must not go out. By mid-morning, fatigue begins to settle across shoulders and backs. No one announces it. Work continues. A cook tastes broth and nods in approval. A stable hand wipes sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. A servant carrying linens pauses only long enough to shift their weight before climbing another staircase. Spiral stairs again. Becomes clear that in an early 12th century castle, vertical movement defines much of daily life. Supplies stored below must be carried upward. Orders given above must be carried down. News travels by foot, not echo. And yet, amid the repetition, small moments of levity survive. A stable boy jokes quietly about a stubborn mule refusing instruction. A cook tastes the stew and declares it fit for a lord, though everyone nearby knows it contains more barley than meat. Laughter flickers briefly before work resumes. These moments matter. They do not stop the labour. They soften it. By the time the Lord emerges to attend to matters of land or allegiance, much of the invisible effort has already been completed. Floors swept, fires stabilised, food prepared, equipment inspected, horses fed, messages delivered. Authority stands upon unseen foundations. If Chapter 1 revealed the structure of the castle, Chapter 2 reveals its pulse. Stone walls may intimidate outsiders, but inside survival depends on hands. Hands that knead, scrub, sharpen, lift, carry, stir, record and repair. The early 12th century castle is less a monument than a mechanism. Remove the labour and the illusion of permanence dissolves quickly. You begin to understand that being trapped here for 24 hours would not test your courage first. It would test your stamina. The castle does not sleep when you are tired. The fire does not pause because you ache. The animals do not wait for convenience. Every day resets at dawn, whether ready or not. And still, the work continues. Because in this world of stone and timber, of lords and labourers, of hierarchy and habit, the castle survives only as long as its people keep moving. By late morning, in an early 12th century castle, hunger begins to organise the entire household more effectively than rank or command ever could. Because regardless of title, armour or obligation, everyone inside these walls eventually depends upon the same fires, the same stores of grain, and the same complicated effort required to turn raw provisions into something resembling a meal. Food does not simply appear in a castle. It travels, often slowly and with considerable effort, from surrounding fields worked by tenant farmers, through muddy roads and guarded gates, into storerooms designed less for comfort than preservation. Sacks of barley and rye are stacked carefully against stone walls where cool air delays spoilage, while wheels of hard cheese rest beside barrels sealed with wax and pitch. Nothing here is casual. Every loaf represents planting seasons, weather, risks, and labour measured in aching backs rather than convenience. The kitchen itself feels warmer than anywhere else in the castle, though warmth arrives mixed with smoke, steam, and the constant scent of boiling grain. Large cauldrons hang above open hearths, suspended from iron chains blackened by years of use, each containing some variation of pottage, the dependable foundation of medieval diet. Into this simmering mixture goes whatever the estate can spare: onions, beans, cabbage, herbs from the garden, perhaps scraps of salted pork if fortune allows. The result changes daily, though rarely dramatically, and no one expects surprise so much as sustenance. A cook tastes the pot with practiced seriousness, nodding slightly before adding another handful of leeks, while nearby a younger assistant attempts to slice bread evenly, and fails in ways immediately noticeable to everyone except himself. Bread matters here. In the early 12th century it functions not only as food but as utensil, plate and occasionally reward, with coarse trenchers absorbing broth until softened enough to eat at the end of the meal. Nothing is wasted unless it absolutely refuses cooperation. Roasting meat, when available, transforms the kitchen into temporary spectacle. A joint turns slowly above flame, rotated by a servant whose entire responsibility may consist of ensuring that dinner does not burn on one side while remaining stubbornly raw on the other. It is patient work requiring attention rather than skill, though boredom remains a constant companion. The boy assigned to the task watches fat drip into the fire, listens to the steady crackle of wood, and likely counts the rotations simply to remain awake. Elsewhere, bread ovens radiate fierce heat as loaves bake in batches timed carefully to avoid waste of precious fuel. Flour dust lingers in the air, settling across sleeves and hair until bakers resemble pale ghosts emerging periodically from clouds of steam. The rhythm is familiar enough that conversation continues without interruption, gossip travelling easily between kneading hands and rising dough. Meals inside a castle follow hierarchy as faithfully as any ceremony. The lord's table receives finer wheat bread when available, while most of the household eats darker loaves made from rye or barley. Ale accompanies nearly every meal, safer to drink than untreated water and mild enough for daily consumption. Even children partake, though the strength varies widely depending on skill and honesty during brewing. Despite appearances, medieval food is not uniformly grim. Herbs grown within castle gardens, parsley, sage, thyme, lend unexpected brightness, while imported spices, when present, signal wealth impressive enough to travel great distances. A pinch of pepper or cinnamon transforms ordinary dishes into quiet displays of status, noticed immediately by attentive diners. Storage presents its own ongoing challenge. Salted meats hang from beams, preserved against decay yet demanding soaking before cooking to remove overwhelming salinity. Fish arrives dried or smoked, its scent announcing presence long before inspection confirms quality. Butter must be consumed quickly or clarified into longer-lasting forms. Every decision balances flavour against survival. Outside the kitchens, anticipation spreads gradually through corridors as smells escape into passageways and chambers. Guards returning from watch linger slightly longer near doorways. Servants carrying linens adjust routes almost unconsciously toward warmth and scent. Hunger equalizes expectation in subtle ways that hierarchy alone cannot entirely prevent. When the meal is finally served, benches fill quickly. Conversation rises alongside steam drifting from bowls. Eating is rarely silent, nor particularly delicate. Bread tears easily in strong hands accustomed to labour. Broth is consumed efficiently. Someone laughs at a remark lost beneath general noise, while another concentrates fully on the rare pleasure of warmth spreading after hours spent outdoors. Table manners exist, though practicality governs behaviour more than refinement. Shared dishes encourage cooperation and occasional negotiation. Elbows compete quietly for space. A dog waits patiently beneath the table, confident that gravity and generosity will eventually provide opportunity. There is relief in eating together. For a short while, work pauses. Responsibilities remain certainly, but the act of sharing food introduces rhythm into a demanding day. Stories resume, complaints soften. Even disagreements seem less urgent when accompanied by full stomachs and steady firelight. In an early 12th century castle, meals anchor time itself. Morning labour leads toward food. Afternoon duties follow recovery from it. Evening brings another gathering before darkness settles fully across the countryside beyond the walls. You begin to understand that food here represents more than nourishment. It is reassurance, proof that stores remain full, that harvests succeeded, that winter, though inevitable, may yet be endured. When bowls empty and benches scrape backward, the pause ends almost immediately. Dishes return to kitchens, fires require tending again, animals must still be fed. Bread prepared today determines comfort tomorrow. Nothing truly stops. Yet the memory of warmth lingers as people return to their duties. carrying with them the quiet satisfaction of having eaten well enough to continue. And somewhere near the hearth, another pot already begins to simmer, preparing for the next meal in a cycle as constant and dependable as the castle itself. As evening settles over an early 12th century castle, the change arrives gradually, marked less by sunset than by the steady withdrawal of activity from open spaces into firelit interiors. The courtyard that only hours earlier rang with movement begins to empty as labour concludes for the day. Tools are gathered, animals secured, and heavy wooden doors pulled shut against cooling air descending from surrounding hills and forests. Light fades unevenly within stone walls as towers lose sunlight first and lower passages collect shadow where torchlight struggles to reach. Servants move through corridors carrying candles protected by cupped hands, their small flames precious enough to justify caution, since illumination in the early 12th century remains costly and fragile, and darkness is accepted rather than resisted. With night approaching, the castle reorganises itself once again as livestock are counted and enclosed, stable doors barred carefully against theft or predators beyond cultivated land. Replacing a horse would strain even a prosperous household, and grooms move methodically through stalls, calming restless animals before full darkness settles. Along the wall walk, watchmen assume their evening positions, drawing cloaks tighter as wind carries distant sounds from the countryside, barking dogs, shifting trees, or travellers hurrying toward shelter before night claims the road. Visibility fades quickly, and imagination often fills the distance where sight can no longer confirm safety. Within the chambers, preparation for sleep follows familiar rhythm. Fires are strengthened where fuel allows, while much of the household relies on shared warmth across benches, pallets, and straw mattresses spread wherever space permits. Private sleeping rooms remain rare, and companionship offers reassurance against unfamiliar sounds carried through corridors once activity quiets. Without artificial light beyond the walls, darkness becomes nearly complete, encouraging long-held beliefs that night belongs to uncertainty. Evening prayers spoken quietly by chaplains or household members mark a boundary between safety inside and whatever may move unseen beyond the gates. In the Great Hall, supper concludes more quietly than earlier meals as fatigue settles into bodies worked since dawn. Servants clear trenchers and sweep rushes from the floor while conversation softens near the hearth, where a musician may still play for listeners leaning back in firelight. Laughter appears occasionally before fading into comfortable silence as candles shorten and shadows lengthen across timber beams. Elsewhere, quieter duties continue. A steward reviews provisions by candlelight while a smith checks banked coals so morning work may resume without delay. Late travellers admitted through smaller gates are questioned carefully despite exhaustion, for caution increases once darkness limits certainty. Sleeping arrangements reveal the realities of castle life. Lords retire to elevated chambers where tapestries help retain warmth, though even these rooms remain cool, while servants settle fully clothed beneath shared wool blankets with boots kept nearby should alarm interrupt the night. Outside, the watch continues uninterrupted as torches flare along battlements, their light visible across surrounding land as reassurance and warning alike. Guards walk familiar paths worn smooth by generations, listening as carefully as they watch, since sound often travels farther than sight after dark. Night moves differently within the castle. Without constant labour dividing attention, awareness settles on smaller sounds, shifting firewood, distant footsteps, wind pressing against shutters. Sleep comes lightly and often in intervals, interrupted by the need to tend fires or adjust against creeping cold. interruptions accepted as ordinary rhythm rather than disturbance. Beyond the walls, roads vanish into darkness navigable only by memory or moonlight, and travellers delayed too long now wait cautiously for dawn. Within this uncertainty, the castle's confinement begins to feel reassuring rather than restrictive. Gradually stillness settles as fires burn lower, and only the measured footsteps of passing guards disturb quiet corridors, while stone walls release warmth gathered during daylight hours. You begin to understand that survival within an early 12th century castle depends not solely upon walls or weapons, but upon continuity. Watch replacing watch, fire replacing fire, one day yielding carefully to the next. Night does not end the activity here, it merely softens it, and as darkness deepens beyond towers and battlements, the castle remains quietly awake until the first grey light prepares the household to begin again. Soon the gates will open once more. By the time morning returns to an early 12th century castle, those who live within its walls rarely greet the day with surprise, because castle life is defined less by dramatic events than by repetition, so reliable that seasons often feel more distinct than individual days. The gates open once again, admitting light and responsibility, yet for permanent residents the rhythm changes very little from one sunrise to the next. To outsiders, a castle represents power and security, rising above surrounding villages as visible proof of authority. For those inside, however, life feels closer to participation in a carefully ordered household whose rules shape nearly every aspect of existence. Rank determines sleeping arrangements, clothing quality, food portions, duties, and even proximity to warmth during winter, creating a social order understood instinctively by everyone present. Movement through the castle reflects this hierarchy constantly. Lords and honoured guests occupy upper chambers softened by hanging cloth meant to reduce drafts, while servants navigate kitchens, storage rooms, and service passages rarely noticed by visitors. The same walls contain entirely different experiences depending upon one's place within them, and although protection is shared, comfort distributes itself unevenly. Ambition quietly survives within these confines. A young squire polishing armour imagines advancement through loyalty or skill, while a literate clerk understands that record-keeping grants influence unavailable to stronger men. Skilled cooks, stewards, and craftsmen earn trust that may secure long service within stable households, an achievement often more valuable than uncertain opportunity beyond the walls. Castle life also demands endurance of proximity. Disagreements cannot easily be escaped when dozens share limited space through long winters, and minor irritations linger longer than intended. Someone sings enthusiastically near sleeping quarters, another claims favoured space near the hearth, and diplomacy becomes a daily necessity rather than refined virtue. Despite hierarchy, familiarity grows unavoidable. Residents learn one another's routines, who rises first, who lingers longest at meals, who tells stories worth hearing after dark. Shared hardship produces quiet bonds formed less through friendship than recognition, since stability depends upon cooperation, whether acknowledged openly or not. Visitors occasionally disrupt this balance. Travelling knights, merchants, clergy, or messengers introduce news from beyond local lands, bringing accounts of distant courts or conflicts that briefly transform ordinary days into spectacle. For a short while, imagination travels farther than most residents ever will. Yet departure follows arrival, and routine quickly resumes once the gates close again. Stories remain, growing slightly more impressive with retelling, while daily obligation settles comfortably back into place. Seasons mark time more clearly than calendars. Winter draws activity inward toward shared fires. Spring expands labour into surrounding fields. Summer demands preparation for harvest, and autumn fills storerooms against uncertainty ahead. Each season reshapes priorities while preserving familiar rhythm. Leisure exists, though modestly. Dice games appear near hearths. Archery practice doubles as recreation, and storytelling remains the most reliable entertainment, requiring little beyond memory and audience. Humour often grows from shared inconvenience, stubborn animals or poorly repaired tools, laughter serving as relief rather than performance. Privacy remains rare throughout castle life. Even solitude unfolds within reach of communal sound. Footsteps overhead, distant conversation, the steady crackle of fire. Silence beyond the walls might feel unfamiliar to those accustomed to constant human presence. Children raised within castles absorb hierarchy naturally, learning patterns of authority long before formal instruction begins. Corridors and courtyards become spaces of cautious play shaped equally by curiosity and discipline. With age comes quiet authority. Older servants guide younger workers through knowledge earned by repetition, their memory of past shortages or harsh winters often proving more valuable than strength alone. Survival favours experience. Over time, residents measure safety differently from outsiders. Thick walls inspire reassurance rather than awe, while the closing of gates signals rest instead of confinement. Familiar smells and routines become markers of belonging, even when comfort remains limited, and yet vulnerability never disappears entirely. Political alliances shift, harvests fail, and leadership changes through inheritance or conflict. Those living within castle walls understand that stability depends upon forces extending beyond stone defences. Still, life continues. Morning follows night, fires are lit again, and duties resume with practiced familiarity. The castle endures not because it stands unmoving, but because generations adapt themselves to its demands, sustaining both authority and survival through repetition. By the end of 24 hours within an early 12th century castle, the greatest realization concerns continuity. Life persists through cooperation, routine, and acceptance of limits imposed by environment and hierarchy alike. The gates open once more to the waking countryside. Beyond them lies uncertainty and distance. Behind them remains a world sustained day after day by ordinary people whose lives rarely appear in chronicles, yet without whom the castle itself could never endure. And as the household begins again, much as it did yesterday and will tomorrow, you understand that being trapped within these walls was never truly about confinement, but about belonging to a rhythm older than any single life lived inside it. A castle does not exist in isolation, no matter how self-contained its walls may appear from within, because every stone laid into its curtain wall represents not only defence but declaration. From a distance, the rising towers signal authority long before a traveller reaches the gate, announcing ownership of land, allegiance to a lord, and control over the surrounding countryside in ways that require no spoken explanation. Peasants working nearby fields see the castle daily against the horizon, its presence both reassuring and demanding. It promises protection from raiders or rival claimants, yet it also represents obligation in the form of rents, harvest shares, and service owed under feudal agreement. The relationship is rarely simple. Those who labour in open fields depend upon the castle for defence, while the castle depends upon those same labourers for grain, livestock, and taxes that sustain life within its walls. The early 12th century remains an era of shifting loyalties across much of Europe, where inheritance disputes, rival claims, and fragile alliances shape political landscapes as unpredictably as weather shapes harvests. In such an environment, a castle becomes more than residence. It serves as administrative centre, legal court, storage facility, and military stronghold simultaneously. Disputes over land boundaries may be settled in its hall, while prisoners captured during minor conflicts might find themselves confined within its towers. Authority is exercised quietly here. A lord seated upon the dais in the great hall does more than dine. He hears petitions from tenants, resolves disagreements between neighbouring farmers, and negotiates with visiting knights whose loyalty must be reinforced with both courtesy and subtle firmness. Decisions made within these walls ripple outward across fields and villages, affecting harvest distribution, labour expectations, and local stability. The castle therefore stands not merely as architecture but as instrument. Messengers arrive on horseback bearing sealed letters, their wax impressed with insignia that carry meaning far beyond their small size. News of distant conflicts, marriages strengthening alliances, or rumours of rebellion travels along muddy roads until finally delivered through the castle gate. Those messages may alter plans immediately, shifting troop readiness, or prompting the strengthening of defences long before any visible threat approaches. Within this broader context, the castle's daily routine acquires new weight. The sharpening of weapons, the inspection of armour, the maintenance of walls are not simply chores but preparations undertaken in acknowledgement that peace remains conditional. Even during quiet seasons, watchfulness persists. Beyond political tension, the castle also shapes economic life. Markets often gather near fortified settlements because security attracts trade. Merchants prefer to conduct business where walls promise safety, and craftsmen establish workshops within reach of protection. The castle becomes anchor around which local economy organises itself, influencing patterns of settlement that may endure for generations. Symbolism carries power equal to stone. Towers rising above the countryside communicate permanence and strength, even if actual security depends upon manpower and loyalty rather than height alone. For villagers, the sight of banners flying from battlements reinforces identity tied to lordship and territory. For rivals, those same banners serve as reminder that land is claimed and defended. Yet castles are not invulnerable. Siege remains a real and feared possibility in the early 12th century, and preparation against it shapes architecture directly. Thickened walls, narrow arrow slits, reinforced gates, and elevated keeps reflect lessons learned through conflict. Wells within the inner bailey ensure access to water should outer defences fall. Storerooms hold grain sufficient for months when harvest allows. Even seemingly mundane features reveal anticipation of hardship. Despite preparation, the prospect of siege introduces psychological strain difficult to fully measure. Those living inside understand that walls may protect but also confine. During prolonged conflict, freedom of movement disappears, food dwindles, and tension magnifies ordinary disagreements into serious strain. The same community that thrives through cooperation during peace must endure collective endurance during threat. Outside observers interpret castles differently depending upon position. For allied nobles, they represent partnership and mutual defence. For rival claimants, they stand as obstacles requiring strategy rather than admiration. For peasants beyond direct lordship, they may appear distant and imposing, symbols of power, affect life without inviting participation. And yet, despite these layers of political meaning, the castle remains fundamentally human in its operation. Its strength lies not only in masonry but in relationships, oaths sworn between lord and knight, obligations honoured between tenant and landholder, trust maintained between steward and household. Remove loyalty, and stone alone cannot preserve authority. Over decades, some castles expand. Wooden palisades give way to thicker stone. Towers rise higher. Additional buildings cluster within outer walls as prosperity increases. Each generation leaves marks upon the structure, altering it subtly in response to changing needs. The castle grows not only upward but inward, shaped by those who inhabit it. Weather leaves its own imprint. Wind erodes mortar. Rain darkens stone. Moss creeps slowly across shaded surfaces. Maintenance becomes endless requirement rather than occasional effort. The image of permanence depends upon constant repair. As your 24 hours draw to close, the castle's role within the wider world comes into clearer focus. It is neither purely refuge nor purely symbol but intersection, a place where land, loyalty, labour and leadership converge. When gates open at dawn and close again at dusk, they regulate more than physical entry. They mark boundaries between inside and outside, between authority and obligation, between security and uncertainty. Each opening and closing reinforces order within a landscape that rarely guarantees it. Beyond the walls, fields stretch toward distant hills, where other lords govern from their own fortified seats. Networks of allegiance link castle to castle across regions, forming chains of influence extending far beyond what any single resident may fully perceive. The early 12th century unfolds through such networks, stitched together by stone fortresses and the people who maintain them. Inside, life continues as it did yesterday and will tomorrow. Outside, forces shift gradually, sometimes imperceptibly, until change arrives in the form of messenger, banner, or distant smoke on the horizon. The castle stands between those worlds. It absorbs tension from beyond its walls while projecting stability outward. It shelters families, administers justice, and prepares quietly for conflict that may never come. It gathers within its confines both ambition and obedience, privilege and labour, faith and uncertainty. In the end, what defines an early 12th century castle is not merely the thickness of its walls, but the web of relationships that sustain it across seasons and generations. Stone may declare power, yet only people preserve it. As dawn returns and light touches battlements once more, the castle resumes its visible rhythm, though beneath that steady surface lies awareness of the larger world always pressing against its gates. And whether viewed from within or from distant fields beyond, the castle remains what it has always been, a structure built to endure in a time when endurance itself defined survival. In an early 12th century castle, authority does not rest solely in the hands of the lord who presides over legal disputes and military obligations, because beneath the visible structure of feudal hierarchy operates another system of the management equally essential to survival, guided not by sword or banner, but by oversight, negotiation and daily discipline, exercised most often by the lady of the household. While chronicles tend to celebrate battles and alliances, much of a castle's stability depends upon the quiet competence of those who manage its internal order, particularly during the lord's frequent absences, when obligations draw him toward neighbouring territories or campaigns whose outcomes remain uncertain. In such periods, the castle does not pause. It adapts, and responsibility shifts without ceremony toward those who remain within the walls. The lady of an early 12th century castle oversees more than domestic comfort. She supervises food storage, textile production, household discipline, and the welfare of dependents whose loyalty strengthens the estate. Wool must be spun and woven into garments capable of enduring winter cold. Linen requires cleaning and mending. Stores of grain and salted meat must be tracked with care equal to that given by any steward. In prosperous households, such management extends outward towards surrounding villages, where disputes among tenants occasionally reach her chamber seeking resolution when the lord is absent. Education begins here as well. Children of noble birth learn manners, prayer, and literacy within these walls, often under guidance shaped by the maternal authority and clerical instruction alike. Boys destined for knighthood receive martial training, yet their earliest lessons in behaviour and expectation unfold within the structured environment maintained by the household's women. Girls observe the patterns of management, hospitality, and negotiation required to sustain estates of their own one day, absorbing knowledge that will travel with them into marriages arranged as much for alliance as affection. Marriage in the early 12th century rarely resembles romance in the modern sense, yet within castle walls companionship develops through shared responsibility and mutual dependence. Partnerships are forged not only through ceremony, but through endurance of long winters, uncertain harvests, and occasional political tension. The lady's influence may be subtle, but it is rarely insignificant, especially when correspondence, gift exchange, and alliance building require tact beyond martial display. Daily life under her supervision blends discipline with routine familiarity. Servants understand expectations clearly defined through repetition rather than proclamation. Hospitality remains constant obligation, for travellers and visiting clergy must be received with generosity, reflecting household honour. Even during scarcity, courtesy persists as currency capable of strengthening alliances more effectively than stone fortification alone. Within private chambers, spaces soften slightly compared to public halls. Tapestries depicting religious scenes or heraldic symbols hang along walls not merely for decoration, but for insulation against drafts seeping through mortar joints. Chests hold garments carefully folded, some dyed in colours whose vibrancy signals status visible even in dim light. The solar, often reserved for quieter work and conversation, becomes a centre of instruction and administration distinct from the bustle below. Yet the early 12th century castle remains no sanctuary from difficulty. Childbirth presents genuine danger and illness spreads quickly where proximity governs daily existence. Remedies rely upon herbal knowledge passed through generations, prayer offered with sincerity rather than certainty. In times of sickness, authority shifts toward care rather than command, revealing the fragility underlying outward strength. Women within the castle occupy varied positions beyond noble rank. Some manage kitchens with authority equal to any knight commanding soldiers, their control over resources granting influence recognized quietly but consistently. Others serve as attendants, seamstresses, wet nurses, or companions, each role essential within a system sustained through cooperation. Their labour rarely enters chronicles, yet without it the castle's visible order would collapse swiftly. Communication networks often flow through these quieter channels. Letters composed by scribes travel sealed, but frequently shaped by discussion occurring within private chambers. Gifts exchanged between households carry symbolic meaning, interpreted carefully by those accustomed to reading nuance, where overt declaration would prove dangerous. Influence moves subtly, weaving through corridors as effectively as banners flying above towers. Leisure within the household reflects both piety and practicality. Needlework serves decorative and functional purposes simultaneously, producing garments while occupying hands during conversation. Religious observance structures portions of each day, reinforcing moral expectations, binding community together. Storytelling, music, and shared memory soften the rigid edges of hierarchy, creating moments in which rank recedes slightly before reasserting itself with the next formal gathering. During times of threat, the role of women expands further. Historical accounts describe noble women directing defence in the absence of husbands, organising provisions, strengthening morale, and negotiating terms when necessary. Though such events remain exceptional, their possibility shapes understanding of capability that extends beyond stereotyped boundaries. Strength within a castle takes multiple forms, not all of them armed. The upbringing of children within these walls ensures continuity of both property and identity. Heraldry taught at a young age becomes more than symbol, it embodies inheritance and obligation. Stories of ancestors reinforce expectations of conduct linking present behaviour to lineage, stretching backward through generations. Memory operates as instruction manual for future action. As seasons pass, alliances formed through marriage and correspondence reshape political landscapes quietly yet decisively. A daughter's departure to another castle carries with it not only personal adjustment but strategic recalibration of loyalties. The household shifts in response, adapting to absence while maintaining continuity. You begin to see that life within an early 12th century castle cannot be understood solely through stone walls, weaponry, or visible authority. Beneath those outward signs lies a complex domestic structure balancing discipline with care, negotiation with obedience, ambition with stability. The castle functions because relationships are maintained as diligently as walls are repaired. When evening falls and the household gathers once more near hearth and chamber, conversations often turn toward plans extending beyond immediate tasks. Marriages to be arranged, provisions to be increased, alliances to be considered, children to be instructed in conduct befitting their future roles. The future of the castle is shaped here as surely as in any council of armed men. In this way, the early 12th century castle reveals itself not merely as fortress or symbol, but as living household whose endurance depends upon partnership as much as protection. Authority may be proclaimed from the dais, yet stability grows in quieter rooms where management, memory, and intention guide daily existence. As your 24 hours continue, the walls feel less like rigid barriers and more like framework within which countless lives intersect, each contributing differently yet indispensably to survival. The castle stands because its people, visible and invisible alike, sustain it, and within its chambers, decisions are made every day that will determine not only tomorrow's routine, but generations yet to come. Life within an early 12th century castle unfolds not only according to labour, hierarchy or political obligation, but within a framework shaped profoundly by belief, because for those who lived behind its walls, the physical world existed alongside an unseen one considered equally real. Every decision, from planting crops to settling disputes, occurred beneath an understanding that divine order governed events beyond human control. The castle chapel, often modest yet deeply significant, forms the spiritual centre of daily life. Built of the same stone as the surrounding defences, its purpose differs entirely, offering protection not against armed enemies but against uncertainty itself. Candlelight reflects from painted surfaces while incense lingers faintly in the air, separating the space from the noise and obligation of the wider household. Prayer structures time as reliably as bells or meals. The canonical hours divide the day into moments of reflection observed by clergy and acknowledged throughout the household. Morning prayer accompanies waking, evening prayer prepares the mind for darkness, and gestures of devotion appear almost unconsciously, a bowed head before eating or a whispered appeal during illness. Faith offers explanation where knowledge remains limited. Storms destroying harvests, sudden illness, or unexpected fortune rarely appear random to medieval understanding. Events carry meaning interpreted through sermons and tradition, reinforcing belief that hardship forms part of a larger divine design. Within castle walls, chaplains serve not only as religious guides, but as advisors capable of interpreting moral consequence alongside political necessity. Confession provides psychological order as individuals seek absolution through ritual acknowledgement, reinforcing communal expectations of behaviour. Even powerful nobles kneel beside servants within shared sacred space, temporarily equalize before divine judgment despite social distinction elsewhere. Belief in the early 12th century extends beyond formal doctrine. The countryside surrounding the castle remains filled with older traditions carried quietly through generations, where travellers speak of restless spirits or omens revealed through weather and animal behaviour. Such ideas coexist comfortably with Christian teaching, forming a layered worldview in which divine protection and supernatural danger occupy neighbouring explanations. Night deepens these anxieties. Without artificial illumination beyond firelight, darkness encourages imagination shaped by storytelling and inherited caution. Watchmen walking battlements sometimes murmur blessings beneath their breath. Habits form less from fear than from recognition of vulnerability beyond human sight. Religious observance governs life's most significant transitions. Birth introduces new members through baptism performed swiftly in uncertain conditions. Marriage ceremonies unite families under sacred witness, while burial rites ensure remembrance and reinforce continuity between living and departed generations. Within the chapel, prayers offered for ancestors maintain connection across time, reminding residents that lineage extends beyond immediate experience. Tomb markers anchor identity to place, transforming the castle into a repository not only of authority, but memory itself. Clergy residing within the castle perform practical duties alongside spiritual ones. Literacy grants responsibility for correspondence and education unavailable to most residents, and children often encounter written language first through sacred text rather than secular instruction. Illness reinforces reliance upon belief. Remedies combine herbal knowledge with prayer, and recovery frequently appears miraculous regardless of cause. Survivors attribute healing to divine mercy, while loss strengthens devotion rather than skepticism. Even warfare carries spiritual dimension. Blessings precede campaigns, relics accompany travellers, and victory or defeat may be interpreted as signs requiring gratitude or repentance. Such beliefs influence decision-making as steadily as military preparation. Festivals interrupt routine through celebration grounded in religious calendar. Feast days bring music, improved meals, and temporary relaxation of hierarchy, allowing communal identity to renew itself through shared observance. As your time within the castle continues, the integration of faith into daily existence becomes increasingly visible. Governance, family life, illness, and survival all pass through moral understanding shaped by religious expectation. The unseen world influences behaviour as consistently as physical walls shape movement. Security therefore derives not solely from stone defences, but from conviction that order exists beyond immediate hardship. Prayer provides continuity when events defy prediction, offering reassurance that life unfolds within purpose, even when outcomes remain uncertain. The chapel bell eventually sounds again, its tone carrying through corridors and courtyards alike. Some pause briefly while others continue their work, acknowledging the sound inwardly, as faith operates both publicly and privately within castle life. Beyond the walls, forests darken, and villages settle into evening. Yet belief sustains confidence that protection extends beyond visible watchmen. Spiritual assurance complements physical defense, together forming the foundation upon which medieval life rests. As the 24 hours approach completion, you understand that existence within these walls depends upon acceptance of forces both seen and unseen. Stone shields the body, while faith steadies the mind against uncertainty impossible to eliminate entirely. And as candlelight flickers across chapel stone, illuminating faces gathered in quiet reflection, the castle reveals another form of endurance sustained not by strength alone, but by shared belief carried forward generation after generation. By the time dawn returns once more to the battlements of an early 12th century castle, the light feels different than it did when you first entered, not because the stone has changed, nor because the towers stand altered against the sky, but because understanding has shifted quietly during the passing hours. What seemed imposing at arrival now appears familiar, and what felt confining begins to reveal itself as structured rather than restrictive. Morning mist settles lightly across the surrounding fields as the gates prepare to open again. The same heavy crossbeam that sealed the entrance at dusk is lifted by practiced hands, iron fittings creaking softly in the cool air. Beyond the threshold, the countryside waits in pale grey light, unchanged in its broad outline, yet subtly altered by knowledge gained from within. Inside the walls, activity resumes with the same steady rhythm you have already witnessed. Fires are coaxed back to life where embers have dimmed. Buckets are lowered into the well. Bread prepared the previous evening is inspected and divided. Nothing dramatic announces the beginning of a new day, because for those who live here, novelty is less important than continuity. You begin to see that the castle was never truly about spectacle. From a distance, its towers suggest drama and conflict, yet most of life within unfolds through repetition so consistent that time is measured not in excitement but in endurance. The 24 hours you have spent inside these walls contain labour, sustenance, authority, prayer, negotiation and rest. Yet none of these appear extraordinary to those who carry them out daily. The early 12th century does not move quickly. Decisions travel by messenger, not instant communication. News arrives on horseback, sometimes days late. Seasons dictate priorities more reliably than ambition. Stone weathers slowly. Generations inherit responsibilities that feel less chosen than accepted. In such a world, patience becomes not virtue alone but necessity. As the gates open outward, a subtle shift occurs. The outside world reasserts itself. The movement of traders along distant roads, the lowing of cattle in nearby fields, the steady labour of peasants whose lives intersect with the castle's authority whether they stand within its walls or not. From this vantage point, the fortress appears less isolated than interconnected, its presence woven into the broader landscape. You recognise now that confinement within the castle was always relative. Those who reside inside depend upon fields beyond the walls. Those who work the fields depend upon protection offered by the stone above them. Authority flows in both directions, binding interior and exterior through obligation and necessity. The memory of night lingers faintly as daylight strengthens. You recall how darkness gathered in corners, how watchmen paced battlements, how candlelight softened uncertainty without erasing it. Morning does not eliminate vulnerability, it simply makes it less visible. The same walls that felt protective in darkness now seem almost ordinary beneath clear sky. Within chambers, conversations resume. Plans are made for coming days, grain tallies reviewed, correspondence prepared, lessons continued, repairs scheduled. Life inside an early 12th century castle does not conclude when your 24 hours end. It continues with minimal acknowledgement of your brief observation, shaped by routines older than any single moment you have witnessed. Children cross the courtyard again, their movements confident within boundaries they have always known. Servants carry linens between rooms with the same practiced familiarity. A clerk bends over parchment near a narrow window where light falls most generously. The castle absorbs these movements without ceremony, just as it has absorbed countless days before. The structure itself reveals quiet signs of endurance. Stones bear subtle weathering from wind and rain. Timber beams carry darkened scars from years of hearth smoke. Steps worn smooth by generations reflect countless passages unnoticed at the time. The castle stands not as frozen monument, but as record of repeated human presence. You may have expected tension, spectacle, or danger to define your stay within these walls. Instead, what remains most striking is steadiness. The early 12th century castle survives through patterns, watch replacing watch, season replacing season, child replacing parent in inherited roles. Dramatic moments occur, certainly, yet they do not define daily existence. Most days resemble the one you have experienced, complex in responsibility, modest in outward display. As sunlight spreads fully across the battlements, banners lift gently in the breeze. Their colours announce allegiance, yet they also signal continuity. The same fabric that flew yesterday rises again today, reaffirming stability within a world that rarely guarantees it. Standing near the gate as it remains open for passing travellers, you sense that departure will feel less like escape and more like transition. The castle does not release you from imprisonment because you are never truly imprisoned. Instead, it returns you to a landscape whose rhythms mirror those inside the walls. Labour, faith, authority, and cooperation unfolding steadily across time. Looking back once more, the towers appear neither romantic nor forbidding, but purposeful. They were built to endure uncertainty, and in doing so they created a contained world where structure offered reassurance against forces beyond control. The 24 hours have revealed no grand secret hidden behind stone. Rather, they have shown how survival in the early 12th century depends upon alignment between lord and tenant, between labour and provision, between belief and action, between inside and outside. Each element reinforces the others until the castle becomes less an isolated fortress and more a living intersection of responsibilities. As you step beyond the threshold, the sound of the gates behind you carries less weight than it did upon arrival. It no longer signals confinement but continuity. Within those walls, fires will burn again tonight. Watchmen will pace, bread will bake, prayers will be spoken, disputes will be settled. Children will learn, seasons will advance, the castle remains. And in its persistence lies the quiet truth of medieval life. Endurance was rarely dramatic, yet always deliberate. Morning stretches outward across fields and roads, and the early 12th century world resumes its measured pace. Behind you stands a structure built not merely of stone, but of repetition, obligation, belief, and shared survival. The gates open and close again, as they have for years, and will for years still to come. And with that steady rhythm continuing behind you, your 24 hours within the castle draw gently to an end.